Once again, my name is Paul Bruce. First, I want to thank Dr. Carter Lynn. Thank you for inviting me to speak as a guest and with a blank check, which, if anyone even still knows what those are, it's kind of like Venmo, but with paper and very slow. And about any topic that I'm passionate about, because, passion was really the important part here. But right now in my life, and I hope yours too, one of the most relevant questions that I face personally is what is enough? Now, with this presentation, there's also an Obsidian Notes Vault with, at a GitHub repository link behind this QR code. And that includes links and additional thoughts and sources. Now, for those of you who are listening that do take notes, a lot of notes, I would love for you to connect with me afterwards, and maybe we can actually share some of the thoughts that you have about the things that I bring up today. And one time on the road, my friend Kin, who was also presenting in Barcelona with me, I learned from him that you should really only speak from places that you know well, right? Don't speak about things that you don't know well. And that's why this lecture is of a reflective nature. So, in keeping with the theme, enough, I personally have had enough. Sometimes you'll hear people say that because they're fed up. In part, I'm a little fed up with technology, but I have had a lot, just so that you have a little context about who's talking to you now. I'm a citizen of the United States, but I've had quite a bit of international travel. Over the 2 decades of my technical experience in software development, and for the past 10 years, I have journeyed around the world and the inner workings of software vendors. I've had the pleasure of working with teams and customers from all around the world, no doubt. 8 of those years were spent helping to build technical communities in the greater Boston area. And I'm actually rolling that back right now a bit to focus on my startup. Since 2016, Dr. Carter mentioned it earlier, he and I, together with a lot of others, developed a standard around DevOps in the context of regulated and high compliance organizations, which is now IEEE ISO 32675. That was a learning journey for sure. And in all that time, I have seen a lot of tech trends come and go. And now everyone has to be an AI company, but just to attract funding. Okay. So that problem is not new. What is new for me at this point is launching my own startup, which is called Grogistics. It's an incubator focused on accelerating useful technological solutions, specifically for small and medium-sized independent family farms, at least in the United States for now. Now, here's where the poll comes into play, right? That's enough about me. I don't want to talk about me too much anymore. So who's ready to move on? And who's paying attention? And so when we get to polls, I would like to see, 100%. 100% is ready to move on. Okay, great. So that's the first piece of feedback. That's enough about me. In that case, across my life experiences, I find that anything worth building takes the all of us, and it takes time. Neither of these things are very convenient, mostly because people are the most complicated part of any system. But the right which is coincidentally also a reference to the book by Albert Savoya, fundamentally, the right generally requires collaboration with each other, whether it's colleagues, customers, clients, or even open source contributors, just to arrive at the right decisions over what is good enough at specific points in time, and then to do that faster than isolated individual efforts by either people or companies in an industry. The thing is, we all share one planet, a global economy, and the decisions on another side of the world quickly affect us now, all of us. Some people in our world do not like to share, and others don't have enough of a share. And every day, we progress these things one way or the other. So here's a question to consider. Who here is without any support from others, right? Who's in this program right now completely on their own? My guess is a very few people would actually say yes. And for those who do, I bet the going would be a little bit easier if you did have more support? Now, I'm sure you're already thinking about your career. And I want to use this word enough and the question of what it is enough throughout the rest of this time is sort of a lens, right? Maybe a forcing function to think about some of the dimensions of that space that we can traverse together in this conversation. What is enough for your career? Well, that's a question about the future, and it's an expansive one. It's a big topic. So, as a programmer, I like to break things apart that are too big to fit into my head. To me, there are at least three aspects that we should touch on at least today. And that's first, credentials, experience, and opportunity. What is enough in relation to credentials? You're in a program, right? So that's a good question to ask. What is enough? And you're going to be in a workforce. Well, when every company is a software company, it means that there's always something out there for CS students. Though I'm guessing that the national average of anywhere from 50 to 100K per year will not be enough of a salary for you in the long term. Also, high tech is a very volatile industry, meaning that you're likely going to be switching organizations and roles every few years. And you could either do that proactively or you can do that as a reaction to some other decision somebody made for you. There's also a million or probably more people like you and me, not actually us, but close enough to be competitive in the workforces that we're looking for jobs for. And what they might not have is the same passion, the same drive, the same understanding over the imperative that you have to make your own decisions. A story I want to share real quick is when I asked my friend Anna Huddleston, who's a Babson Masters grad and owner of a local startup right down the road, what she would say is the greatest value of a grad degree. She thought about it for a minute. And I think that's important when asked a question, think about it for a second. And then she said, well, it exposes you to the lingo, the language of others who you will need in your career. For instance, accounting basics go a long way to getting things done with the finance department when you manage a $2 billion budget, which she does in her day job at Converse. Even in preparing for this lecture, right, I saw over and over again a theme of like the master's degree is the new undergrad degree. Maybe that's importantly so. The more safety and revenue critical roles are in organizations. Some job descriptions, they include master's degrees. I have definitely experienced that in my own recent job hunting. But they secretly hide their flexibility around it. So look out for that. A CS student, when exposed to critical and things like systems thinking, things like what really good requirements versus not good enough look like, and how to work with project and product managers, these are the truly useful foundational elements, far more than like the latest JavaScript framework that you can learn from free tutorials. So to the students that are listening right now, I say it's really good that you are putting in the effort right now. Once earned, no one can ever take your degree away from you. Early investment is the first step to later payoffs, but probably immediate payoffs, especially in the form of money, would probably feel better than my pearls of wisdom right now. The early jobs, they can help with cash flow, and I learned that from experience. I exited my undergrad just to pay the bills for my wife to go to college, but then I never went back, right? And the pay won't be good early. It might get better later. So while that's the case, while you're working on those early jobs, ask yourself, what else other than money should I be looking for from early jobs? This leads us to ask the question, what is enough experience? Again, experience is a big topic, right? So let's break it down a bit. Domain experience depends on, well, the domain, right? Aviation terminology is different than accounting, agriculture, healthcare, as are the processes and dynamics of business in those domains. This does not have to be daunting. Pick something, right? Nerd out about a particular domain that right now at least aligns with your passion, and importantly, surround yourself with context, which is something that a former board member of mine once said to me. This is why every morning in this summer I was volunteering on farms as part of my Grogistics startup work. It literally is field research, right? When I hear from other workers, not just terminology, but understand the processes and where the challenges are in that space. The other thing is like different roles and responsibilities definitely have different minimum viable requirements. A chemist will need different education than a marketing professional. Wait, unless the marketing professional is marketing chemicals, right? Like there's overlap there. A director of engineering, right, needs more experience than an individual contributor developer until maybe that developer tries their hand at management later on in their career. My hope is that yeah, you will aspire to something and you'll reach a little outside your grasp. You'll reach higher. But my warning to you is just don't put yourself in a position that you can't do the job well, right? Take those requirements that they post seriously, but try to get to a conversation. And especially this stuff applies to managing people. It's not just for the hands-on vocational. A good manager, such as what you might see in a book called The Manager's Path, like worth their weight in gold. Also look for experiences in regulated industries. This especially helps even outside those types of organizations. Where do you think SaaS companies get their revenue? It's all from Fortune 1000s and usually governments or some kind of, partnership to do that kind of work. Inevitably, regulated industries are going to be your customers or your clients or your users. But getting back to that prior point about money, I want to mention I call it MTTR. You might know this from a technical as mean time to recovery or something. I call it mean time to revenue, right? Mean time to return. When like me, even now, 20 years in, you have to balance what you're willing to do to make money you need to make. And the timing plays a key role in that too. So for students and grads, right? Two questions. How long do you think it's going to take for you to break even on your expenses versus your target income projections? Ooh, that's a that's a painful question, Paul. Well, I mean, have you done the math? Again, it's not easy to talk about futures and unknowns, but you should be able to whiteboard the basics in about 15 minutes, right? That should be top of mind if it's not already. How about something a little more immediate? What are you doing now, besides being in your degree, to foster employment opportunities? What of those opportunities are you creating to help you hit the ground running once you're out of the degree program? And that's where we're going to get back to the poll, because I care about this a lot. So going back to your phone or your laptop where you had that poll, I've got to activate that question, unless it's automatically activated. Wow. Okay. We've got a pretty big hit on job searches, of course. Working on fun pet projects. That's pretty cool. I wasn't expecting so many people. That's a very important part. We'll talk about that in a little while. Developing long-term relationships. I'd like to hear more about that maybe after I'm done speaking. Very interesting. And then that leads us to the last part of that, which is opportunity. So I need to go find my window again. There we go. Just like we did with enough experience, it's a big topic. So let's break it apart a little and look at those dimensions. First off, opportunity is never evenly distributed globally or even in your neighborhood. But you are in a growth industry right now, grad programs, and there's consistent growth, about 5% year over year, in both the demand and the supply of master's degree program graduates. You are a part of that. You're in a growth industry. And the good news is, might not sound like it, but the good news is that there's always real and hard work to do somewhere, whether it's software infrastructure, development, release management, testing. Oh, how about security? That's a really important thing, but there might not be enough budget or courage in employers to actually do those things well. Many positions are entry level grinds. Getting past opaque, non-human filters is not easy. Ask me how I know after 6 months of doing this, right? Human referral is still an important part of your job search. And you should not expect people to be a referral to you that haven't worked with you already, which is tricky because that's like a chicken and egg problem, except for you're in a program that you can demonstrate your proactive passion and your professionalism, right? With your professors. But don't expect a referral, please, from a professor if you haven't developed a personal relationship with them. So do it. So do that. Submit drafts early and ask for feedback. That's a good starter. Now, with employers, once you get past and into salary negotiations, you will likely experience practices that seem to be purposely built to undervalue you because often they are. They're trying to get the least amount of money, spend the least amount of money. So get ahead of that problem too. There, here comes your pet project. Find those kind of projects and goals, maybe even certifications that demonstrate your efforts and learning paths. The value isn't necessarily in the certification or the learning there. That's a short-term thing, right? It's a more longer-term thing of demonstrating your proof of progress. You also might find short-term programs that also have placement paths like boot camps, not for the sake of the boot camp, right? But they often have placement paths for alumni with local businesses that are more than just a simple internship. People networks, right? I mentioned that I was doing some volunteering. I organized DevOps Days Boston with a bunch of others and the Boston DevOps meetup and stuff. People networks that come out of things like conferences, those meetups, job fairs, and local user groups are still a fantastic way to both deepen your surface area of employment opportunities, but also work on your people skills, your peopling, right? Being able to engage people you don't know. It might be uncomfortable at first, but it's better that you try and you get better at that. These networks will also help you, especially when the landscape of opportunity seems bleak. That's another ask me how I know. I do have a reference to Muyiwa. Ola Muyiwa Kolayemi is a Perscalis grad that I met last year at DevOps Days Boston, who had the courage enough to do a lightning talk. Right? He's now a DevOps engineer in Boston, but 4 years ago he was a farmer in Nigeria, and now he has a career. So that's there are a lot of examples of passion, but also imperative, and getting into those people networks paying off. Each of us are on a journey. And while career is part of that journey, these things are not the same. I've met a lot of people over the past probably 10 years of being on the road and speaking and talking and listening at conferences who've had degrees in things like theater, finance, marketing, right? Who are also smart enough to upskill on technology and look good enough to hire into software engineering roles. This is not the problem you might think it is, right? Oh, more people trying to compete for jobs that I want. Not necessarily, or in fact, you could do the same. You could turn that on its head. You could apply your technology focused degree to many other areas of business. What do you think data sciences is, right? The point is, your journey will likely be shaped differently than your ideal career path. Let's talk about your journey a little. Your own journey is something you own. To me, there are just a few critical pieces to consider in relation to your journey, at least today. And let's start with learning, because that's the one that I think is lifelong. We are inundated by information all day long. not just ads, but like information overload, right? Does this mean we've learned anything just by existing, right? Our human brains need to exercise knowledge before it becomes truly useful in other contexts. And yeah, well, new technologies like LLMs that you'll see me be using in some of my business, they are based on neurophysiology, and that might help you summarize lots of information into chunks that you can absorb or ask new questions. It's still on you to push and pull your brain matter to learn the process of adequate inquiry, which is yet another reason why degree programs are useful. There are people surrounding you that understand that and are trying to help you do that. Enough learning is a very personal thing, a very personal question to ask. You have to know yourself. You have to know your limits and constraints, your tolerance for feeling new to a subject and managing that emotional work. It is not zero effort. You also have to know, like I said, how to people, because ultimately there's like only so much in individual learning you're going to be able to do before you have to check it against the experiences or the requirements from others. And as a technologist, like I promise you, you will find it's increasingly important as you mature in your practices to listen to others, like farm feedback and understand it deeper than just taking it at face value. I've seen too many product managers just say because the users said so. And sometimes that makes sense. But most of the hard work is figuring out what not to do and how to synthesize that. Ultimately, this is all so that you'll build more meaningful things, right? Year over year. A quick note too, mixed and individual and group learning experiences. What I mean is like learning in isolation, it isn't better or worse than group setting. It's different. And you should always be getting better at both. An example is my friend James Bach, who is a renowned tester in the industry. He once told me on a little one-on-one we had that when he feels too stuck in his own word bubble, his own brain about something, he switches to a mode of mostly obtaining feedback from others. When he's had too many of those meetings and group discussions, he turns a bit back to deep work on his own. That's a pull and push that's taken decades for him to figure out, right? But it's purposeful and it's often necessary on different projects and at different times of life. But if there's one thing I can tell you out of experience is part of enough learning, at least for me, it's that you must have an impetus of your own that you own specifically for your learning because that's what's going to draw you forward. It's not your project at a job because somebody can and probably will take that away from you for one reason or another at some point. It's something that you can adjust the time and effort on as needed, these pet projects that you have. But it also means that you probably shouldn't be doing something that other people critically depend on because you need that variability, or at least have enough loose coupling, as they would say in systems architecture, to others and their interest in it, right? So, next question, poll. Who's still paying attention? Anyone? Well, I saw the second one come through. Let me just make sure that this one's activated. Oh, nope, it's already going. There we go. It's interesting. It's auto auto advancing just at the right times. I love that. I think it's probably because I hit on the slide. That's pretty cool. Wow, geez. Over half of the people said that it's been less than 24 hours since they worked on a pet project. You know what that means? Again, after I'm done talking, I want to hear from some people, whether it's on the call or whether it's afterwards, what those pet projects are. That's very interesting. Your so your journey isn't always predictable or repeatable, right? This is more of a narrative across time. and not trying to fall prey to the 2020 hindsight thing, right? A journey is kind of a directional point in time, right? But we need something in our lives that's repeatable and somewhat predictable. Synthesis is a process, and importantly, one that takes time. Specifically with knowledge synthesis, as opposed to like photosynthesis, knowledge synthesis for humans, it involves consuming, thinking, sharing, iterating on that stuff, right? And because synthesis is a process, yes, it's repeatable and it can be applied iteratively, but I would warn you, like iterating without useful inputs will usually lead to useless outputs. And you got to get better at that, right? And how you do that is through exercise. You work on it. Part of the exercise is producing things like your own thoughts and ideas, just like you're doing now in a degree program. But if you're doing this the rest of your life, it's also beneficial. A great book on this topic, I would say, is The Creative Thinker's Toolkit by Gerard Puccio. Um, Make sure you capture your ideas as you're having them, even if you think they're a waste of, like they've already been thought. That's okay, right? Use methods like Zettelkasten is one that I do in Obsidian, and maybe even socialize them with others, right? Dr. Carter has a good point I love. He's brought it up twice in the 7 years at least, that documentation, and particularly documentation around retrospectives and incident response reports, these things should not be write once, read never operations, right? The value of them comes from reading them and then doing something about that, right? So publishing your own material can be used as kind of a forcing function to complete your synthesis, at least an iteration or a loop. And definitely having a pet project that you check on regularly is another way to do this. An example of that is the graph that you see on the screen. This is from my home lab, right? I collect data from a variety of instruments in my small garden space. It's nothing anybody else cares about. So if it goes down, what, right? The other day it did go down. The power cord got unplugged after the wind shifted things and led to a gap of data, which is inconvenient for me. Now, without putting the time in to contextualize this, my graphs looked like there was 36 hours of daylight. So clearly it was wrong. And if this was a customer, this would be a problem, right? My point is the synthesis wasn't just looking at the graphs and consuming information. It involved hypothesizing why, checking what was going on, adjusting in different places, and then verifying afterwards what the result was. So the short is, I mean, if anybody cares, I fixed it by anchoring the greenhouse, just drilling it. Sometimes it's a small fix, but the longer term, it gave me time to reflect and go, the long term is that I have to have a battery. I have to have some resilience in that system. Exercising the synthesis muscle takes human effort. That's my point. Here's an example of synthesis as a process at Grogistics. The ideation process, it's effectively how to generate, hopefully, new ideas. For now, I mean, I'm going to skip some of the detail, but the main point is that the process of invention and innovation still takes humans, but it can now go faster because of some of the latest AI applications like RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, and with specific scopes over both the prompt engineering as well as the vector, well, the resources that get turned into vector so that then the RAG will work, right? And this is just a process. Speaking of process, speaking of process, some might not like that word. Some might not like the word process because, well, we've experienced a few that really aren't optimal, maybe broken even, or not terribly useful. Now, upon first encounter, you might find that you're not having a positive experience about some particular process somebody else had a hand in, even if afterwards you realize it is a useful one. And this is because your memory of a process and understanding of its value only come after you've gone through it, oftentimes way after, later, right? The problem is this is counter to positive reinforcement psychological dynamics that we have in our head, right? So, case in point, just consider this bias. And if you're not a coffee or tea barista, please tip yours double next time for knowing how to make and follow a process and make a cup of coffee that you benefit from. So coming to class, right, you're awake. That's beneficial for you. That's a process, right? Do it well. I'd encourage you to make your own processes, your personal ones, right? Starting with yourself. Mental hygiene benefits from repeatable, consistent patterns. Messy space often leads to a messy mind, which produces messy outcomes, messy code, messy architecture. I would say develop regimens of cleanup, physical, cyber physical, and digital. Like personal Kanban is one of those things. This is a book and you can go look at it. 3-2-1 backup strategy for me. Every so often, one of my drives fails. I feel safer when I have a 3-2-1 data backup strategy for myself. I change my passwords on a regular basis. These are more mental regimens and hygiene that help me feel like I've got the right process. I can come back to that. I remember that and I practice it. Here's one: create key performance indicators for your life, right? Your personal projects and your learning paths. When you feel a little bit ragged, for instance, or stressed out, ask some questions about your personal process. For me, first ones I thought about were, do you skip meals because you're too busy? Are you turning in projects on time or too late? How often do you have those support calls with maybe your family or friends? These are measurable things. How many nights did you stay up too late over the past month? All of these things you can and should measure if, you feel they apply. And it definitely applies to your professional work too. More specifically, you're going to benefit from having good enough process in place over how you document your work, how you maintain your job and career roadmap, how you pitch ideas and business plans. Scoring well on performance evaluations, even in getting internal funding, all benefit from developing professional practices that demonstrate to others that you are taking progress seriously. Again, example of a formal process from Grogistics, it's incubation, right? Not ideation. We saw that before. That's where you generate ideas. Incubation is a little bit more like the double diamond, the converge, not diverge, right? We take those pre-validated new ideas from the more messy ideation process and rigorously work out proofs that the idea translates to tangible results. And, we're okay with finding at some step that it's not worth taking the next one on a particular item, at least not yet, or without better data. A side note, though, about crossing professional and personal work wires. Most employers tend to keep their data tightly controlled. They give you a laptop, you shouldn't move data out of that. So this is good. This is actually kind of important. But it does lead to a lack of personal proofs about the internal process developments that you've done and that you can benefit from future work out of. So aside from proprietary data, and unless NDAs stipulate, your learning process is about your synapses, and it should be something you can talk about elsewhere, like this, right? This presentation, for instance, minus names and details, right? Now, because much of my own developed process here was specific to a prior employer, I actually had to reimagine much of this process and specific techniques like the red box here, the intensity and volume proofs. I had to do that manually. But again, if you've trained your own synapses by exercising something a lot, which I did for the past few years, it should not be hard to reconstruct the abstract form and apply your current learnings back into it, which, case in point, this is me reconstructing how I would identify INV questions. And it took about an hour, a couple of Post-its, and, well, a beer. The last piece in your journey I want to touch on is a little more personal, is what is enough support? Everyone is their own kaleidoscope of characteristics and needs. But how do you make sense of which areas in your life need what kind of support? If you aren't familiar with it yet, and I'm not an armchair psychologist, but I strongly encourage you to read up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but figure out which aspects of your life currently hit on what levels. Like, you are not the bullet point that goes on the Maslow's hierarchy as a whole. There are a lot of aspects in your life, your needs, right? And they might be at different levels. For me, my family is my personal support system, and we are that for each other. For you, while you're in school, this also might include friends. Please make sure that you know who and how to spend your emotional budget on, and let these people know that you're better off because of them and that they are valued. That's very important, and maybe they'll do the same for you. Communities of practice, those networks, those people networks, might also be where you get some of your personal support from, but more than likely it's going to be that you get a few like-minded folks that eventually become long-term friends, right? So it's not an immediate hit. Don't expect a lot from that. In terms of economic support, um, well, money sucks. It's just terrible. It never feels like you have enough, even when you do. The only way I've found to gain experience on personal finances is to seek the advice of other more knowledgeable people on the topic. Economic support should not just be thought of as funding sources, like where do you get your paycheck? It should also include, where do you get your vision for what you're going to do with it, right? Your financial advisement. Who is your financial advisor? That's a pretty good question. Some people might have one, some people do not. And that's a dangerous place to be. The first thing good financial advisors would ask is, show me your budget. Every dollar in your life should have a job and a purpose and a time for use. Just please don't live life like I have over many years without really checking in on your planned budget on a regular basis, right? Live by that a bit, and definitely don't hope that you're going to strike it rich. Don't live on that hope, right? Hope is not a strategy, as you might have heard. And on the job front, the only thing I'll say about professional support is that I have seen far too little applied to not enough worthwhile investments between humans at work. Work is not romance, as my friend Chris would say, but it is important to learn how to garner the support from your leadership and also your colleagues. Useful leaders at every level do three things. They commit and to accomplishable goals. They unblock work for others, and they celebrate the success, not just their own, especially not just their own, others' success. And leaders are not just the executives at the top or the management. Leadership can happen at all levels. And if you don't see this in an organization or can't find the proofs, maybe think twice before joining that organization. Because off the top of my head, I can think of a few good examples, right? Like Edith from Launch Darkly, uh, Christine from Honeycomb, and definitely Paul Campbell from Tito, right? These are some of the people I've experienced firsthand. I've been either on panels with or had personal discussions after a fraught bike ride with a flat tire, these kind of things. Like, these are my personal experiences. But there are a lot of examples of successfulness through great leadership, but unfortunately there's many more of the opposite as well. I would suggest really thinking, who do you actually want to work with in the future? And more importantly, here's the next question. Do you have a mentor or coach, a professional mentor or coach? This is where we check to see if you're still paying attention. All right, we're getting a handful of people. All right. I don't understand though why it's not showing up live. That's interesting to me. 15. Oh, maybe I did something wrong with that question. Lynn's gonna ping me about how much I actually tested these, and I did. I did test them. I just didn't test them like 5 or 6 times. So, uh, all right, all right, all right, all right. So it's been like 40 minutes now, right? Is that enough of a challenge? Have I equally scared and encouraged you enough? Well, what is enough of a challenge, right? I won't go through all of this. I will just say this is why I'm working on Gorgistics with the scope of small and medium-sized independent farms, particularly in the United States of America. The ag system is wickedly broken. The food systems are problematic, and that's just in the US where we waste a lot of our food. Around the world, it's even worse. So again, I won't go into too much detail, only to say we don't just need ideas, we need people who are willing to actually work those out, right? Who can see them through. Here's an example from my work on farms. This is just enough to make a difference. This is called the CoolBot. It's a little device that you can put in a self-made large refrigeration unit and hook to a commercial air conditioner and get it to go from 60 to more like 35 degrees, right? It tricks it into thinking that it can go lower than it can. This is a game changer, not for large macro ag, monocultures. This is for a small farm. Being able to do this instead of paying $15,000 to $20,000 for one of these big refrigeration units, it costs maybe on the order of 3,000. And the details, the numbers, we've worked that through. I've worked that through with one of the farmers to legitimize, to say, yes, this is the powerful thing. It's 1970s technology, but applied in the right circumstances at the right times. This is a game changer economically for a significant piece of the system of a small farm that ensures a certain amount of operational resilience. The real challenge that we face is to find our own meaningful goals. For me, that's to try to help agriculture at large. Uh, and the future might not be clear, but I would say with good enough goals for now, people can align and find a workable direction together. Just keep in mind that there are multiple factors to achieving a goal, and usually these factors act upon each other, kind of like an end body problem. Some people might be familiar with the good, fast, cheap paradigm or cost, return, risk, but the factors to your goals might actually be more than just that, right? That's an overly simplistic paradigm for most goals. I would say that another view that is useful is a now versus later approach. And that lends itself to things like roadmaps. What are we doing now? What are we doing next? What are we doing later? A roadmap can help communicate what's needed now and what we think we'll need as these factors change. A structure I've also found useful is something called goal, strategy, objectives, tactics, which is effectively just an information hierarchy, which is what? I've heard too many people say, here's my top 5 goals. It's like you're serving multiple owners there. This is too many things, right? So breaking it down with an information hierarchy where there is one goal, then there's maybe a chosen strategy or an approach. You can call it an approach to that goal. And then a handful of clear objectives, which are just outcomes from whatever approach you take that you need to achieve the goal. If you don't have those, you're not achieving the goal, right? Then there's tactics, stuff you have to do to get there. And yes, there are many goals in every system, but at least being able to articulate each in a structured manner solves a lot of communication and alignment issues between people, whether that's as a pet project or in a large organization. You can also apply the now versus later lens to requirements. You've already probably learned a bit about requirements in this program. And it's especially pertinent, the now versus later, because as it turns out, If you plan all of your requirements for like 6 to 12 months, oops, you're going to arrive at a place that has no real-time learning. Future requirements depend on the learnings and the outcomes from delivering the prior set or the now requirements, just to be on the path of the right it. Requirement scopes that are too big to fit into a person's head all at once are also a signal, at least to me, that they need to be broken down and broken apart, possibly separated as like user stories or features, for instance. A good exercise I'd love to see some of the folks here do on a whiteboard of their own is their own personal roadmap. I've got one actually right here, maybe for later. And it's okay to guess. It's okay to idealize. And it's okay to play around with the puzzle pieces of what fits where and what, sequence of events, as Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, who wrote The Goal, might say. There's sequence of events. And in that, you'll be able to see which parts, like what is and isn't enough. So my challenge question to you is, can you whiteboard? Oh, wait. Do I have one of those? Oh, here's the example of my whiteboard that's right here. I did this in like 10 minutes. Now I've had like 6 months to really think about what I want to do, but like it should be very easy for you to whiteboard this out. I've actually been to job interviews where they say, whiteboard out what you think your life for the next 5 years is going to be like. Okay. So the question to you is, can you whiteboard your own personal roadmap? Oh boy. Oh, that's okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're getting a little competition between people who think they can, or definitely can, and people who haven't really thought that out. That's okay, right? I would encourage you to try. It only takes like go find a coffee or a beer or something like that and play around with it for half an hour. See what comes out. So, rounding this out, getting to the end here, there are many times where something is just not enough, like a user story without non-functional requirements, which I call operational requirements. Or how about budget for new hires? But let's go back to that concept of your journey. What's not enough there? Well, your ownership over your own drive. If it's not there, it's not good. This is why now maybe you understand why I think passion is a minimum viable requirement of a good journey. I mean, it might need to take a back seat to paying bills from time to time, but if it's completely missing, it's kind of like soup without salt. Try it once and then try it with salt. And more seriously, wages. Even with a solid grasp of my own personal and economic ideal roadmap, what is not enough? And probably same for you. Minimum wage is not enough. Federal and state assistance programs are not enough. If we don't support each other in some way, shape, or form, eventually and statistically, at some point, it's going to be your turn on the bad end of that stick. I promise you. So somewhere in the middle between too much and not enough, I think is a workable aim. It takes consistent effort. It takes hard work, even just to get there to the middle way. And to build a solid foundation, it takes maintenance over time. For CS and software engineering students, I would say, professionally speaking, it's not enough to graduate and then what, not learn over time? Of course you're going to learn as a child. You know this. You should deepen your knowledge of the domains you already have, and preferably through the interaction with others. You always need to find the right balance of paradigms to balance your professional and personal efforts. This old notion of work-life balance, you leave work at work. I've seen very few people who can really do that. It's not exactly how we experience life as human beings. You should find niches, right? Specific topics that you can be successful at and build on them and occasionally overlap them, sometimes maybe even conflate them with other things on purpose, like what you might find in the Creative Thinkers Toolkit is something, let's just play with what these two things are like, completely unrelated. What would happen if we put them on the table together and play with them? And it's the same thing with different domains of experience. That's what earns you new opportunities and learning paths. And towards the end here, I learned very early on, this guy is dangerous. This character that's all the things, that's really dangerous. When you're saying never enough, right? It's never enough, continuous learning. Uh-oh. I would say give yourself and others a break from time to time. You just can't do all the things sustainably. It's important to know your own work in progress process limits, progress limits, the WIP limits, right? And sometimes you can keep those WIP limits within a particular domain like work or personal life or home. But think about psychologically, your WIP limit is oftentimes, especially with anyone can interact with anybody now, whether it's Slack or text or whatever it is, your WIP limit oftentimes spans across your professional and personal activities, and it varies in different seasons of your life, and that can be really emotionally draining. So be okay with saying no to new incoming asks, or at least be prepared to put something else down before receiving new things to work on. And I say never because I've experienced when you say no to coworkers, that's not always a comfortable thing. And sometimes what you feel like now you're in trouble. The fact is you're doing the responsible thing oftentimes by saying no, but maybe rather than a no, it's a what is the right timing for this? What is the deadline for this? Can I get to you in 5 minutes, right? Or can I get to you tomorrow? Quantize your efforts, especially in life, like we do at my house with the Trello board. Right? All the chores in the house are on Trello. So we all know kind of what we've done and we get to look at it afterwards and go, wow, this was a busy day. We feel it. Manage them like a pipeline of work. The personal Kanban I mentioned earlier. And like everything, exercise often makes you better at something, especially estimation, which is looking at the future, which we're never good at. But iterate to improve. And iteration itself means that you're going to have to make adjustments between those iterations. So my last challenge question to you is, what two things can, not necessarily will, can you pause your efforts on right now? What can you release, even if it's temporarily, that would positively impact not only your grade work, but your work and your life? So here's that poll there. Hmm. So two. Okay, the reason I mentioned two is because at least my experience with martial arts, the instructor, the sensei, will always say, "Okay, we're going to do 100 or 50 burpees or something like that." And then when you get to 50, they go, "Okay, five more." And then when you get to that five, one more. This is the last one, best one, right? Like they say in Little Ninjas. If you only have one thing as an option on the table, you have no options really. It's that one thing. So stretch, like squeeze the lemon just a little bit, just to think, what's the second thing that you might put down, right? And then you have an option. You can say, well, I said I could put this thing down, but I really can't. So here's the other option. Anyway, all right. And with that, I think I've said enough, right? This has been more than enough for an afternoon or an evening between all of us. Again, you can reach me directly at paulusbruce.io. I'm on LinkedIn. And I said I promise you is the last question, but if you really want to give me some good feedback, the last one is here. Who thought this presentation was just enough, more than enough, or not enough? It's okay to say not enough too. It's all right. But